All right, hello and good evening, Dead Texan here. Now, in my ongoing quest to figure out what to make on this channel, I made a video I thought was heartfelt, telling a personal story, celebrating my nephew and brother, and honoring the Marine 250th birthday, while bringing something to educate people on something maybe not so well known. And it got 6 views. So welcome back to another episode of FTP, Fuck That Puto. Tonight's award goes to a man who's supposed to represent Texas values, but acts more like a DC yes man. Yeah, Representative Tony Gonzales. Now, full disclosure, I'm not even in his district, I'm right next door, but what he does affects all of us in Texas. Because when a so-called Republican from this state decides to vote against our values and cozy up to lobbyists, it's not just his district that takes the hit. It's every one of us who actually gives a damn about what Texas stands for.
Texans know a fake when we see one.
Let's start with the obvious. Tony Gonzales, a Texas congressman, voted for the 2022 Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, better known as a gun control bill. Now, don't let the name fool you. All these bills that restrict our freedom are dressed up in the same way. Safer communities, No Child Left Behind, Affordable Care Act. They sound wholesome, but they always end up restricting or screwing us in some way. The Safer Communities Act gave the feds more authority to restrict young gun buyers and fund state-level red flag laws, the kind that let the government take your guns without due process. Tony sells himself as a pro-gun Texan, but when it came time to actually defend your right to own one, he folded like a cheap lawn chair. You don't get to smile in front of the American flag, talk about freedom, and then go to Washington and make it harder for Texans to exercise theirs. And this wasn't a one-off slip. Tony has voted against Republican interests multiple times. Border security bills, conservative spending limits, immigration enforcement measures, you name it. If there's a way to side with Democrats and call it bipartisanship, Tony's got the pen ready.
You broke your promise.
Now, some folks will say, well, Tony's a veteran. He served this country. And yeah, he did. And I respect him for that. But being a veteran doesn't give you a free pass to turn around and take rights away from the people you swore to protect. If anything, it makes it worse. Because when you wear that uniform, you take an oath. Not to a party, not to a paycheck, but to the Constitution of the United States. That oath doesn't expire when you hang up the uniform. So when a man who's worn that flag on his shoulder votes to undermine the very freedom it stands for, that's not leadership, that's betrayal. You don't get to call yourself a patriot while helping DC bureaucrats chip away at the Bill of Rights. If anything, Tony's service should have made him the loudest voice in defense of our freedoms, not the guy helping to erode them. And speaking of voting against your own base, let's talk about who really loves Tony. AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Now look, support for allies is one thing, but Tony's connection goes a little deeper. Heavy funding, glowing endorsements, and a voting record that lines up a little bit too neatly with what DC lobbyists want instead of what Texas needs. When you see who's writing the checks, it starts making sense on why he votes like a Beltway politician instead of a border state conservative. The man who represents one of the biggest border districts in America, yet he votes more like someone from Delaware. Now, before someone jumps in the comments saying, oh, that Texan's going full conservative, let me stop you right there. I've said it before, I'm centered but right-leaning. I'm not some die-hard partisan. I don't carry water for politicians or parties. I call things like I see them. Supporting the Second Amendment, wanting a secure border, and believing in smaller government doesn't make you far right. It makes you an adult who understands how freedom works. And honestly, if calling out a so-called Republican for selling out his voters somehow outs me politically, then fine. Label me whatever you want. I'm sure you're going to do that anyways. Because at the end of the day, I'm not fighting for party lines. I'm fighting for principles. I've disagreed with both sides plenty. Democrats who want to tax and ban everything, and Republicans who talk tough on TV but cave the second a lobbyist waves a check in their face. I'm just standing on one side that actually matters. Mine. This is all alleged, but let's talk about the elephant in the room. The scandal involving one of his staffers. This is a woman he allegedly had an affair with, who later, according to reports, set herself on fire and tragically died in her backyard earlier this year. According to fire reports, she had doused herself in gasoline before igniting, although family members maintain her death was an accident despite the circumstances. It's a tragedy for sure, but what's equally horrifying is how quickly this story vanished. No updates from police, who appear to be actively working to prevent information from being released. I wonder why. No transparency from Tony, no follow-ups from mainstream press. If this had been any other congressman, especially one who wasn't a party-approved insider, it would have been a feeding frenzy. But since it's Tony, everyone suddenly gets quiet. You may call it personal, but when you run on family values and hide from accountability, people deserve answers. A quick interjection, I planned this video a couple of weeks ago. Since then, Tony has actually come out and denied any connection with the scandal. Obviously, does it take a genius to imagine that he would deny any wrongdoing? He denied any affair or any connection with the death of the staffer, and apparently says that the family also denies any allegations, which again is not surprising. Also says that they asked for privacy, which again, not surprising. He's also commented on Brandon Herrera pretty much for the first time, saying he's beat him multiple times, which is weird because Brandon calls it out himself, saying he's only run once, and actually calls him a zombie opponent, which he keeps having to knock down, which again, Brandon's only won once. So kind of just makes things kind of odd. It's a bit of an odd response, but that's just a quick update on the status of the scandal. I think much is coming out of it because even the coroner's office isn't saying any criminal intent or activity was going on, which is just still very weird. Which is still just a very weird situation to have happened.
Player 2 has entered the game.
Now here's where it really gets fun, because popular gun YouTuber Brandon Herrera, better known online as the AK guy, is back and running against Tony Gonzales again. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Brandon's not some random influencer. He's a firearms manufacturer, content creator with millions of subscribers, and Second Amendment advocate who's built one of the largest gun communities on YouTube. He's known for mixing dark humor, education, and blunt honesty about gun rights and government overreach. He is not a polished politician. He's a Texan who means what he says and says what he means. You might not agree with him on everything, but at least you know where he stands. Now, I'll be clear. I don't know Brandon personally, never met him, though honestly I'd like to someday shake his hand, maybe pick his brain a bit. Maybe on a podcast that he co-hosts. But anyway, I get that people can come across differently online than they do in real life, and we've all seen that. But I've watched enough of his content to tell when someone's being disingenuous versus when they're just being themselves. And from everything I've seen, Brandon seems genuine. He believes what he says, he backs it up with logic, and he's not afraid to call out hypocrisy, even when it's inconvenient. That alone already puts him miles ahead of half the people sitting in Congress. Now, I know Brandon doesn't need my help to defend him. He's doing just fine on his own.
Sure.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part.
I'm doing my part too.
But last time, Brandon lost by less than 300 votes. And get this, Tony outspent him 10-1. 10-1. That's millions of dollars in establishment and lobbyist money versus one guy making videos on the internet with a sense of humor and a spine. And even with that, Tony barely squeaked by. Now that Brandon has more name recognition in his district, it's going to be a hard fight for old Tony.
I'm in danger.
Because every time he posts on social media, Brandon and his friends absolutely ratio him into oblivion. Like clockwork, Tony tweets something about bipartisanship or reasonable gun laws, and within 5 minutes, Brandon or one of his friends like Donut Operator or the Fat Electrician drops a reply that buries him under 10,000 likes. And it's not even close. Tony's posts are basically public ratio farms for these guys. And you know what really says it all? Tony refuses to debate him. Just flat out refuses. Instead, he clips Brandon's podcast out of context, twisting quotes to make him look extreme. He's even on record calling him a neo-Nazi while pretending to condemn violent rhetoric.
Bob Good endorsed my opponent, a known neo-Nazi. These people used to walk around with white hoods at night. Now they're walking around with white hoods in the daytime.
But here's the thing. If you got the courage to vote for gun control, but not the courage to defend that vote in front of your opponent, you've already lost the argument. So let's sum this up. Tony Gonzales, Texas congressman, AIPAC's favorite puppet, anti-gun rhino, and all-around disappointment. For selling out your voters, ducking debates, twisting your opponent's words, and trying to pass yourself off as a conservative while voting like a liberal. Congratulations, you officially earned yourself the FTP award. That's right. Fuck that puto.
Fuck that puto. Fuck that puto.
You've got one of the most conservative states in the country, and you've managed to represent it like you're auditioning for a CNN internship. Anyway, that's my take. I may not be in his district, but I'm damn sure paying attention. And if you're in TX23, you should be too. Brandon Herrera is running again, and this time people are watching closer. Because when a congressman betrays the core values of the people who sent him there, it's not just political, it's personal. Drop your thoughts below. Do you think Brandon takes it this time, or will Tony's donors bail him out again? Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more FTP episodes. And drop a comment on who I should do next. This has been Dead Texan, and I'll see you in the next one.